Hello class, this is period 3 marine biology for Thursday, July 16th. Um, you have 3 assignments for today. The due now, which needs to be done as soon as possible for attendance and participation. So each due now must be done by 12 o'clock noon to count for participation and for attendance. Today the due now is dealing with a mammal, a marine mammal called a manatee. This one was named Chessie. So the questions are, why was Chessie's behavior considered so unusual? Number two, by what means have scientists been tracking this manatee? And why is the public interested in this marine mammal? First I'm going to do is show you a short video about manatees. They're also known as the sea cow, or the cow of the ocean. Here's the first quick little video.
This lumbering mass of a marine mammal is the manatee. 3 species of manatee exist and can be found in coastal waters and rivers. This West Indian manatee is the species common to the U.S. Also known as sea cows, manatees are gentle giants with no natural predators. And weighing up to 1,200 pounds, it's easy to understand why their favorite activity is slowly grazing for food. In fact, manatees spend up to 8 hours a day consuming seagrass and other aquatic vegetation. They chew so frequently, their teeth are continuously being replaced and pushed forward, a sort of tooth conveyor belt system. And though they can swim in short bursts up to 15 miles an hour, they prefer a slower glide around 5 miles an hour. While swimming, manatees can stay underwater for 3 to 5 minutes before needing to surface for air. Then, with a single breath, manatees can replace 90% of the air in their lungs. By comparison, humans replace just 10%. Yes, sirenians, the order manatees belong to, are unique. So unique, in fact, that their close relatives include the massive elephant and the tiny hyrax. The 3 species may not look much alike, but genetic data shows they evolved from a common ancestor. A more recent relative was the Steller's sea cow. Much larger than the manatee, the Steller's sea cow could grow to 30 feet long, the size of a small whale. Sadly, once the species was discovered in the 18th century, it took less than 3 decades for it to be hunted to extinction. While manatees don't face the same dangers as their extinct cousins, they are still vulnerable to human activities. The West Indian manatee lives in salt water, but seeks fresh water for drinking. This forces the animal into areas where boat traffic is common. Propeller blades cause serious damage, as do watercraft collisions. Both are a major threat to manatees' survival. Other dangers include loss of warm water habitats and toxic algae blooms, known as the red tide. Unwittingly, manatees are also helped by certain human activities. Up to 60% of Florida manatees now spend their winters clustered around power plant outflows, where waters are significantly warmer. Yet, whether the help is intentional or not, humans will need to play a part in manatee survival. Manatees may not be the mythical mermaids sailors once mistook them for, but the sea cow is no less unique and worthy of attention and protection.
All right, so that video gave you a good background and introduction to the manatee, or the sea cow. The due now is talking about one manatee from Florida called Chessie. It was unusual because Chessie was migrating and spotted in the Chesapeake Bay, Virginia. So they thought it was lost, so they decided to bring it back to Florida, and they put a radio transmitter on it. So the radio transmitter would send a signal to radio stations, even satellites, and then they could track its movements. And then it migrated again as far north as Rhode Island. Now, they thought these manatees would just stay in the Florida waters where it was warm, but this one kept on migrating further and further north, which was very unusual. And it may have been because the water was unusually warm that year, or it may just be that the male manatee wanted to wander further off, and female manatees tend to stay in the local waters. So here's your information for the do now. You can get started on that and make sure to get that done as soon as you can for your participation and attendance grade. Okay, the next part of the assessment today is talking about types of mollusks. Mollusks are a type of clams and mussels. A bivalve is the first type. Bivalves produce natural pearls from oysters, and that results when sand grains get stuck between the mantle and the shell. The mantle tissue, which is like the skin inside the shell, reacts to the sand grain by secreting or making these layers of shell around the grain of sand inside, and that's what forms the pearl. The characteristics, their shells are made of calcium carbonate, which is natural in the water, and the shells are built up by this mantle membrane, which lines the inside of the shells. Shells are usually shut very tight with a small gap opening where water flows in and out of these types of siphons. So the bivalve can bury itself into the sand and then extend the siphon tube for breathing, bringing water in and water out. So here's an example of the clam inside the sand, and water's flowing out and water's flowing in out of these siphons. And that's how it feeds as well. Food particles get stuck on the mucus surface that coats the gills and the mantle inside. Bivalves have an open circulatory system. The nutrients and oxygen are transported through their body by a colorless blood, which is why when you see clams served in food, they don't appear red. They have that, kind of yellow to opaque color. Their adaptations, they live in a turbulent intertidal zone where the waves are crashing, the water comes in, water comes out. So having the ability to be closed is very beneficial for them. Byssal threads made of fibrous protein, almost like hair, that's what the mussels use to attach themselves to the rocks. All right, here's an internal anatomy of a bivalve. The main characteristics would be this foot, which is kind of like a tongue. They use that to bury into the sand. They have the excurrent siphon and incurrent area. And this is all the heart here, and around it will be the mantle, and that's what secretes the enzymes, what makes the shell. Bivalves do age. Age can be determined by observing the shell. Each ring represents a year of growth similar to a tree. Some bands are larger, which indicates that there's more food in that area. Locomotion. They don't really move, but the adductor muscle, which keeps the clamshell closed, can open and shut, cause them to move a little bit. A scallop can actually swim a little bit. It looks like they're swimming. It just closes the shell very quickly, and that rush of water propels it in a backwards direction. And then they can also dig through the sand with their foot. And the foot just kind of looks like a tongue sticking out of the clam. Reproduction, they do have separate sexes. Fertilization and development are external. Females release eggs into the water where they are fertilized by sperm released from the males. So that's the introduction to bivalves. The next one will be gastropods. So here we have the next type of mollusk called a gastropod. If you look at it, you can kind of see this is a snail. Gastropods, a very diverse group comprising 2/3 of all of the mollusk species, called univalve. Uni means one valve, one shell. Gastropoda class means stomach-footed. Locomotion through a large muscular foot with a one-way digestive tract. Open circulatory system consisting of a one-chamber heart with tiny blood vessels. They have colorless blood, just like the bivalves. The kidneys excrete their cellular waste. And the snails breathe by taking in oxygenated water through the siphon tubes. The anterior tentacles are receptors for sensations and touch. And the posterior tentacles are also known as their eye stalks. So they're really reacting to stimuli. The operculum, that's a thick pad of tissue that closes like a trapdoor over the foot and protects the snail. So it can hide itself inside of the shell during times of low tide when there's no water there, or if they feel like they're being attacked by a predator. They can actually close themselves up and be protected inside the shell. Feeding. They crawl and climb around and just slurp up their food, plants, dead organisms, or live prey. They have this very unique radula, a ribbon-like tooth designed to scrape off and ingest algae. So these kind of radula are scraping the rocks, pulling off algae so they can feed it into their mouth. One example is a moon snail. They feed on live clams by secreting chemicals from the foot, and it softens up the clamshell. They insert the mouth and eat the clam from the inside. So they actually kind of like vomit out their mouth and their stomach, and their stomach digests the clam where the clam is inside, and then they slurp up everything back into their mouth. Very disgusting, but efficient. Another example is a cone snail, very abundant in the Caribbean, has toxins to kill its prey. You can step on this and actually get the toxins in your own foot, and it'll just be painful, nothing too bad. You won't die from it or anything. Gastropods. Some snail species have separate sexes, but most are hermaphrodites. Fertilization is internal, and development is external. So that's the talk about gastropods. You should have the information now to do the assessment, which I'll start here. Here is the assessment of the types of mollusks. They have the gastropods, which I talked about just now with snails. The bivalves, which are clams and scallops and oysters with the 2 shells. And the last one is cephalopods, including the octopus and squid, which we talked about last week and on Monday. So each one has their own characteristics. If you read through that, it'll help you answer the questions. The summary talks about the mollusks are divided into 10 living classes, including the familiar gastropods, cephalopods, and bivalves. Mollusks live in a marine and freshwater habitat, as well as on land. You have the types of classes here. Bivalves, remember, is 2 shells. Univalve would be the gastropod, and cephalopods, the ones that don't really have a shell anymore. The shells become internal, and they're very unique because they have camouflage. They can actually disappear in a cloud of ink. They have 3 hearts that pump blue blood, and they're jet powered by their muscular foot, which is actually kind of like a siphon pushing out. They do have eyes and other senses that rival those of humans. So they are very different than the other 2 types of mollusks. So when reviewing this, make sure you pay close attention to the characteristics of the cephalopods. Okay, and here's a interesting video about the type of clam.
Now, let's get this party started under the Pacific Ocean.
Disco clam!
The source of this underwater light show is a mollusk known as the disco clam.
This clam is clearly the disco queen of the sea.
To enlighten us, it's over to our very own disco diva, Adam. This is the Tonoides allis, or disco clam. The disco clam looks electric, but there is no electricity involved. The parts that appear to be flashing are the edges of its mantle, the fleshy lining on the inside of its shell.
On the edge of the mantle is a folded lip that can rapidly curl and uncurl to expose both of its sides. The inward side of the lip is highly reflective because it's covered in tiny nanospheres of silica, which reflects all wavelengths of light. So in daylight, the inside of the lip appears white.
The outward part of the mantle absorbs blue-green wavelengths, so we see it as red. The clam has muscles that pull the lip back and forth rapidly, so it alternates between red and white several times a second, and it makes it look to us like a flashing disco light. But what's the reason for this dazzling display? This kind of display is thought to deter predators like fish, crabs, octopi, and mantis shrimp. This rapid lip movement occurs all the time, twice a second, even in the dark. But when there's a change in the light, such as the shadow of a predator passing over the clam can increase this rapid lip movement to 5 times per second. For this clam, it's all about staying alive. You can't get more disco than that. Coming up,